Welcome back to the channel. Today we are going to be tackling some of the intercooler piping. I got a little bit set up here. So basically, after we got the downpipe and the last video completed, now it's time to move on to the intercooler piping off the turbo. Last year I had it ran down, and right before the radiator I had a V-band clamp. Maybe I'll do that this year, maybe I won't, I don't know. It made it a little too rigid for what I wanted to be doing. Put a lot more stress on the turbo itself. So basically we're going to come off with a 90 here right next to the block. So I already have the one piece with 190. 190 is enough in this system for me, especially this tight. So I have the 190 here taped to a piece from last year. So putting this up inside, I have a couple of lines drawn on here just so I know where I kind of had it mocked up. But I need to play with what's down here a little bit, the angles and the cuts. I don't know if I want to maybe add an angle up here just a little and taper it out, but then I have to put a sharper angle coming back, or if I want to angle it this way so it comes up a little bit. It's kind of an odd position here, and there's not a lot of room. I mean, there's room, but not a lot of like a room for adjustment, if you want to call it that, just to position in this one spot, because it has to go through here and it's pretty tight. I don't remember how I did it last year. I have a couple of the pieces from last year down here. That's one piece, but that's a lot of couplers. That's one piece that I cut. This was the V-band piece. I believe this is the piece that came through between the radiator hose and the sway bar. And you can see, I can see anyways, so right here is where it was rubbing on the sway bar. So it was tight. So I don't know if that's the best option this year, not with this piece anyways, unless I kind of do some repair or put a little bit of a wrap or something on the sway bar for like cushion. Maybe I'll see if I can use something like this. I don't, like I said just a minute ago, I don't know if I want to do the V-band setup again. It made it a little bit too rigid, and then I was just relying on the flex from these two right on the intercooler, and off the 90 off of that. So maybe I'll play with that a little bit. Otherwise, I got some new tubing up in a bin up there. Maybe I'll start kind of chopping that up a little bit and position something a little different. But yeah, I'll quit babbling here and I'll get to it. So the machine I'm using today is a Millermatic 350P aluminum pulse welder. I'm going to be welding this piece of the intercooler pipe onto the outlet of the cold side of the turbo, and align it with the arrow marks flush on this side, like I have noted on there, just so it's in the right position, so when I get home I can put it right up to the rubber coupler right there, and it should line up just right. So this is what it looks like after it's all welded on there. It's not super pretty, it's not TIG welded, it is MIG, but it will still hold. It'll hold boost. Once I put it on the car, I will then boost leak test it, make sure it's good. If there's any leaks, I'll bring it in to work again. I'll clean it up, re-weld what I have to. But as for now, that's what we'll leave it at. We're back again today. I brought the turbo to work, welded the intercooler piece to the turbo so we don't have any problems with intercooler couplers blowing off. So today we're going to tackle as much as we can, trying to get all the intercooler piping set up so that it's ready to go. All I have to do is oil lines and hard mount the turbo. So before I get ahead of myself and hard mount the turbo into the car, I need to pull the intercooler out and clean it up a bit. At the end of the season, the nut sheared off the compressor wheel on the front and took a bunch of aluminum shavings and sent it into the intercooler. So to prevent any catastrophic damage to the internals of the engine, I'm going to take the intercooler off, spray it out, clean it the best I can, and do like a full inspection on it to make sure nothing is wrong with the intercooler before determining whether or not I want to use it or get a new one to replace it. I just need to do a thorough check on it first. So the intercooler is tucked up inside the front of the bumper, right in front of the radiator. And I had some brackets that I made last year to mount it up close to the radiator so everything flows through not only the intercooler but through the radiator properly. So before I can actually get the intercooler out, I need to get this plastic piece off the front in here moved out of the way, or at least kind of moved out of the way, so I can get access to the front bolts on the brackets on the intercooler, and then I will drop it out the bottom right here. So I'll get everything loosened up and I'll have this intercooler out in no time. So rather than sending you into a time lapse, I'll just do a quick snap and the intercooler will be on the ground. And there you have it. The intercooler is out of the car, on the floor. I'll take a quick look at it here and kind of give you a damage report. So the damage from last year that I didn't notice before, I'll try and get a good angle here. Maybe we'll put it up on the workbench here. So a damage report from last season. I'm not sure when it happened, but down on the bottom here, so we'll look at the top first. So there's this nice gap on the fins and the top piece of the plate on the intercooler. And on the bottom, you can see it starts with a nice little gap here, and it slowly smashes up into the bottom layer of fins. I don't know how much that causes like any internal damage, but it's definitely not supposed to be like that. So I must have had some sort of bottom out and front end damage, like going off the track or something. That's the only thing I can think of. I've went off the track a few times, so it seems like it'd be pretty normal, or you know, an accurate assumption that I would have bottomed out on some dirt or grass or whatever it would have been. We'll try and flip up in here. You can't really see in there, but from what I'm seeing, there's not really any chunks of anything from the not from the intercooler, but from the compressor wheel itself. So maybe it won't be so hard to clean out after all. As far as like on the inside portion, there's some damage to the fins, but the back on the bottom is fine. It's just a little bit tweaked in the front here. So we'll probably be able to reuse this and it'll be fine. No big deal, maybe, hopefully. I still have to do a little bit further inspection on it, see if I can blow anything out of it, see if there's any chunks of aluminum or shavings or anything that comes out. And then I'll determine from there whether or not it's safe to use this intercooler. I don't want to have anything going into the engine that could cause damage. I don't want to have to rebuild the engine due to some aluminum, you know. So I don't know if you'll be able to see this. If you'll focus. But it's a little blurry. But I put my finger into one side of the intercooler and just kind of gave it a wipe. And there was a little bit of oil in there, which I kind of figured that my turbo blew out and it blew a seal. But there's little bits of like aluminum glitter stuck in this side, just on the bottom here where there's some residual oil. So I'll get that all cleaned out and hopefully be able to spray it out. On this side, there is not any oil, but there is a little bit of debris, like some almost fine rubber dust. I run an air cleaner on my turbo, but rubber dust is pretty fine. I might need to upgrade my air cleaner a little bit just to get a lot more debris out of the system. I don't want to be sucking in rubber either. I know a lot of people won't run an air cleaner at all. They don't want any restriction to the turbo. But I want my turbo to last and I want my engine to last. I don't want to have to be rebuilding either at all in a short time. So I want to prevent that. I'm going to take some brake cleaner, spray it in here, spray it in this side, take compressed air and try and blow as much junk out of this as I can. Again, it's not a lot of junk, but it's really fine particles. So that can cause a lot of damage to the cylinder walls, rings, valves, lots of stuff in the inside of the engine. So I don't want that to happen. So we put basically an entire can of brake cleaner through the intercooler, and this is what kind of came out. It's really hard to see, but it's not as much junk as I thought it was going to be, which is a good sign. I also put like 150 psi of pressurized air through it to get as much debris and dust and whatever, because it's been sitting a while, out of the system. So hopefully we're in the clear and it won't have any problems. I still have to let any of the leftover brake cleaner that might be resting inside to evaporate and dry out. And then I'll put that back into the front of the car, and we will continue putting the rest of the intercooler piping back onto the car. We're getting close. It's really close to getting to the point where I can actually get back to having the car run. So yeah, we'll put this back in. Now that the intercooler is all cleaned out, we will now put it back into the car. Now it's back in the car, and we can work on the rest of the intercooler piping. Before I put this section of the piping back into the car, I'm going to take apart the blow-off valve and make sure everything is functioning properly. I feel like last season this may not have been operating to the best it could, and maybe that's why it caused an issue with the turbo, shearing off the nut on the front of the compressor wheel due to surge back in the system. I have the blow-off valve off of the intercooler pipe. I'm going to take off these little Allen head nuts and pull this apart. I was kind of just testing, and the piston is like really tight. I feel like it's probably too tight for what I'm doing with the car. So I'll see what's going on inside, why it's moving so hard, and hopefully I can get that set up to where it needs to be. We have the blow-off valve taken apart here. There's 2 springs inside. Maybe that's why it's a little bit harder to open. When you press that all the way down, it's compressed in this tiny little pocket right here. Maybe I'll take out this smaller one that's inside here and just run one, and then it'll be easier for the diaphragm to lift this little piston. So all it is in here, that's really hard to kind of see, but this piston just moves in here and presses against this rubber seal. So when the butterfly on the throttle closes, it creates vacuum on the inside of that butterfly and pulls this diaphragm open and releases all the boost pressure behind it, so it doesn't stay pressurized going backwards towards the turbo. So I'm going to try and get the shaft on the inside there on the plunger lubricated a little bit, because it seems like it's kind of a little sticky. Like it should move really easy. So I'll lubricate that a little bit and get it back together with just one spring here, and then I'll kind of just press on it and test it a little bit and see how that goes. This is an adjustment screw here, and this isn't super tight, and that just presses on here. So I can tighten up my blow-off valve pressure on the spring just by adjusting this bolt on the top, pressing it tighter down onto this diaphragm. So rather than just setting it really heavy with 2 springs, I'm just going to use this set screw that's on here to control whether or not this opens fast or slower. We got the blow-off valve back together. Now we'll test it a little bit. You should be able to maybe see inside the piston moving. It's still fairly stiff, but it's opening much easier than it was before and much more smooth. So we will get it back in the car and keep moving on with the project. So a quick update where I'm at right now. I am finished with the intake side of the intercooler piping. That's now all installed. Now I will move on to the hot side, on the exhaust side. Before I get too carried away putting the turbo back in, I have a couple other things that need to go in first. It's easier to get at with the turbo out of the car. I need to do an oil line feed, and then the oil return on the bottom of the turbo. Last but not least, I need to install the waterline fittings in the back of the engine back here where my splitter is. Back there, kind of somewhere, it's really hard to see. So my waterline can come from the thermostat around under here to the bottom of the turbo, out the top of the turbo, and back to the front of the engine up here, so that the turbo can be cooled not only by oil but by water as well. So we got the new oil line. I got some fresh thread sealer tape on there, along with the brand new copper crush washer that will go on here. We're going to put this down in there into the side of the block. It's got a 90-degree up here to go onto the turbo. We'll get that all installed here, and then I can get ready to mount the turbo onto the exhaust manifold. So the oil port that I'm talking about is right down in there. It's kind of hard to see, but right down in there. So we have the oil feed fitting in, the oil return is on. I have the other water fitting in. This is the last fitting to put in. All of them have thread sealer, except for the return has an O-ring in there. So this is the last fitting that has to go onto the turbo here, and then the turbo can technically be mounted. This one seems like it's a different size than the other one. The other one was a 14. Well, this one might be a 9/16. So we'll swap this over here to a 9/16. One's metric, one's standard, of course. That's just how it goes. And there we go. Both water fittings are in there. Both oil feed and return are in and ready. Now we just got to put the turbo in. It's all hard mounted in now. Manifold's in, turbo's bolted down. I just have to put the oil feed line on it, get some water lines made. The intercooler piping is also in and routed. All tightened down, ready to go. Now I just got to finish the lines on the turbo and put the downpipe on. And it's really close to getting started. Just a little bit more, and I could have this started potentially this weekend. We'll see how it goes. Well, I can't remember exactly where I left off, but I'm pretty sure we're going to be doing the rest of the water line stuff in here. I got to get the water feed going underneath the turbo here to this side, down in there. And then the return, I don't know if I want to come this way and maybe tee into this one so it goes into the front of the block and down, or if I want to return it back to this return from the heater core, because I might splice from here and I might splice into this one. Not sure if I want to do that yet. It all depends. I can't really get back there on the splitter and the thermostat housing back there. If the heater core line comes off of that thermostat housing pre-thermostat or if it's post-thermostat. If it's post-thermostat, I don't know if I want to run the water line to the turbo from that, because it won't be running any coolant through the turbo to cool it until the thermostat opens. Well, that can be kind of a problem if you start getting heat into it and it doesn't have any coolant. It won't like damage the turbo real bad. It just won't be flowing water through it or coolant. My only concern is if it's going to like air pocket in the turbo, because it would be boiling it prior to the thermostat. Hopefully it wouldn't do that, because the thermostat should be opening before it boils. But to be able to have optimal cooling, I want it to be running through the turbo at all times. So pre-thermostat would make the most sense. which would mean if this heater core line is post thermostat, I won't use it. I'll go with a different route. There's a fitting back there on the housing about this size. I don't know if it's exactly that size. It's really small. The fittings on the turbo are 3/8 ID hose. So if the hose back there or barb fitting that would fit back there is smaller than that, I might have a hard time. I don't want to run a ton of splices coming up this way, but we'll kind of see what I can find out. I'll just have to pull it out and see. Otherwise, I do have like a 3/8 NPT fitting to a 1/4 inch barb, but if the hole is smaller than that, that one won't work. I do have, this is like a 1/2 inch barb. That's too big, but I have another one of these 3/8 barbs that I could potentially use, but I don't know if that's big enough of a hole back there. I don't want to have to take it all out. I could take it all out and drill and tap that hole bigger to fit that one, but I don't want to have to modify something if I don't need to. I'll see if I can do something different. And I can't feed off of this one, I don't believe. Maybe I can, maybe I can't, I don't know. And if I could do that, then I'll just feed off here coming this way, because the pressure comes from the back of the engine with the reroute here and comes forward. So maybe I could do that, and then I can tee it back into it. So just go in and come back out. I'll have to try a couple of things, see if it'll work. If it works, great. If it doesn't, I'll figure something else out. So a little bit of time later, I now have all of the intercooler piping in the car. I also have the manifold hard bolted to the engine. The turbo is final bolted onto the manifold. I also have the oil feed line on, the oil return line on, along with the water lines. And hopefully I can turn the key. So fingers crossed, it's all good. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and stay tuned for the next one. Well, I think I would call that a success.